We are, as you know, doing, we've started our little pilot TV series, which was Clone Wars. And we are now going to move that into a 3D animation half-hour version, which will be a regular series. I'm going to get it started and hire the showrunners and all that sort of thing, but then I'm going to step away from it and go and do other things.
When George announced that the show was going to be happening, I think it was, 2005 back in Indianapolis, Celebration 3. And he said that he was going to kick off the show, get you on your feet, and then he was going to step back. Is George still as hands-on as he's ever been?
He was very hands-on in the beginning. I would see him more than once a week at times. I would have them done and direct them to a certain point until I thought they were ready. And then I would show them to him and say, what do you think of this? But once we established the look of the show, he did step back to a degree. But, you know, he will always be involved in the, he sees a story reel, which is like a very rough form of an episode. So he watches that, and then he gives me notes. He used to come in for those, and we would sit together and watch them. Now he just calls me.
And there have been times when we wanted to use things from the EU, and I was like, yeah, but we can't use it that way, so why? I don't want to use it and change it. You know, I don't want to use it and make it something completely different. That's rude.
There were elements that we really wanted to explore, and that was, you know, things that were classic to Yoda.
Dave Filoni decided that the king should have much longer snout than the average Toydarian.
It was important when we attacked the planets. I always wanted to have a different look for every planet. I especially wanted shots where there'd be little rays of light.
He built a Plo Koon costume, and I'm thinking to myself, I can understand Obi-Wan, you know, or some other character, but I'm thinking, Plo Koon, what has he done? Sat on the Jedi Council and just kind of moved his fingers a little bit and tilted his head, but there wasn't anything to him, so he was a clean slate.
Dave Filoni already had a maquette sculpted by Darren Marshall, which was exactly how he wanted Plo to look from the neck up, and he had no shortage of opinions and ideas on how Plo would look from the neck down. I mean, he was very specific about the boots, the belt, the tunic, the collar, everything.
Dave's initial thought about Plo Koon was he wanted him to be this sort of wise, sort of sage-like figure.
You know, I changed it to English, and then that launched the other whole debate. Well, how is he going to sound when he speaks English? And he went from being this kind of strict Jedi, very black and white, to I wanted him to be ancient feeling and wise. Henry and I thought maybe we'd change it up, and we thought Plo Koon maybe is a little more severe of a Jedi Master, and we'd base him more on kind of a Kurosawa samurai. The phrase Kotoya is a greeting in Plo Koon's native language, Keldor. You know, that was something that allowed you early in the episode to kind of go, wait a minute, Ahsoka knows how to speak to Plo Koon in this weird language. Plo Koon surviving in space. This was a hotly debated thing with my master, George.
Hey, what's a Jedi doing out here?
Yeah, he's like, what's that about? How can he survive in space? You know, to me it makes a lot of sense. He's an alien. I don't know what he can and can't do. It's not defined. If we say he can go out into space, then he can go out into space. George always made fun of us because he said, I made 6 films without having anybody fight in space. And I said, yeah, but Grievous got sucked out into space and then walked on the top of the cruiser. George is like, well, he's a robot. And I was like, no, he's not. He's a cyborg. And I put wolves on Plo Koon's clones' helmets because I like wolves. I'm a big supporter of wolves. And I was sure sweating it when we showed it to George because we had changed it quite substantially from the script that he had approved. I kind of just drew an overall map of the direction I wanted the ships to go, and we looked at shots from Empire Strikes Back of them in the asteroid belt, and I said, that's what I want this to be. Inside there were these trains running about. That was one of the times where I kind of let the layout department go with it, so to speak.
For the most part, it works fine. There's one problem. Commando droids only have 2 fingers. But there are scenes in the episode where they're wearing clone gloves and have 5 fingers. Commando droids magically somehow grow 5 fingers when they put on clone armor, and then go back to just being regular droid-handed droids in any other circumstance. Go figure.
He doesn't really do anything, he just kind of stands there, looks creepy, bends his toes over the ledge. So a great opportunity in doing the Clone Wars and, expanding the Star Wars universe was to, well, let's see one of these lizards do something for a change. Let's watch them actually run around.
I mean, originally that battle, I think, went on for 3 pages. I just couldn't stop it.
Anakin can't meet General Grievous.
General Grievous. You're shorter than I expected.
In Revenge of the Sith, we realize that this is the first time they've ever met each other face to face. So here you have a situation where you have 2 major characters in the Clone War that can never really meet. I would like to see that fight of Anakin versus Grievous. Given Obi-Wan's performance against Grievous in Revenge of the Sith, I believe Anakin would take out Grievous fairly easily.
I tried to, again, pay homage to A New Hope, where the droids have cornered Jar Jar and they're shooting at him, and he seems to vanish from beneath his cloak, as we saw Obi-Wan do in his battle with Darth Vader.
I didn't even know that.
You didn't even know that?
You didn't tell me that.
So the idea
was... Probably could have done it better.
Cloak of Darkness was the first time we saw Luminara as a character. I mean, even though she shows up in the movies and the live action, she has a few action scenes, doesn't have any dialogue, and we don't really know anything about her.
In the EU, there were a lot of stories about Grievous, that he was an incredible general that got shot down by Dooku in a shuttle, and then re-engineered by Dooku to fight as a general. And we talked about that stuff. I mean, it was in a Visionaries comic book that wasn't canon. It's just a possibility.
It's very big, and we have lots of novels, lots of comic books, lots of games, and the movies and TV series, and there's a whole world of Star Wars now that didn't exist.
So is there a book we could all buy so we can know where they were born, who their parents were, what their special powers are, what their neurosis?
There's a lot of them. There's got to be at least 24 encyclopedias, and there's encyclopedias to characters, there's encyclopedias to aliens, encyclopedia to droids, to spaceships, and then there's like the complete Star Wars encyclopedia, which is in 4 volumes, big. It looks like the Encyclopedia Britannica, and it's just like it. It's got just got thousands and thousands of entries.
I had the I had the script for the film, and I also had the ear of George Lucas on that one. So any time that I had a question about a character, or I needed permission to take the story in a certain direction, I'd have that input from him. At that time, there was no background for Grievous, so that was supposed to be one of the that originally was an important part of the of commissioning, my being commissioned for that novel and creating a background for Grievous. But I had George's input on that too. Because I said I could, I said I could take this in any number of ways. Is there anything that you were thinking about Grievous in terms of his background? And he gave me a few things that allowed me to sort of expand on the character and give him a little bit of background.
The question is, why would a great general allow himself to be sabotaged, rebuild as a robot, and then just become subservient to someone like Dooku? We called George up, and he came over, and we said, what do you think about Grievous? What's his backstory? Because this is what we heard. George had a lot of ideas about where he thought Grievous came from and what he thought Grievous was about. One of the things that George had mentioned was that he had really wanted to be a Jedi.
But he wasn't Force sensitive. He wasn't able to use the Force. He knew he could never be a Sith Lord.
And his rejection of Jedi status drove him to have modifications done to his body. We still elected to keep it kind of ambiguous. Some of the best stuff is because we don't take that mask off and show you what's under there.
When we first did Grievous in Chapter 20, we had very little information about him. He was just being conceived as a main villain for Episode 3. But for this, we had to really explore him more. And George kind of told me about, he had some thoughts about that he was like an old-style villain where he fights, but then when he's losing, he runs away. We had a lot of discussions about lightsabers. How does he know to use lightsabers? Because it's supposed to be like a special gift, and you're supposed to be Force sensitive. George kind of told me, maybe Count Dooku teaches him.
How often must I tell you? Control my central line. Good. I've been trained in your Jedi arts by Count Dooku.
And then we got a call that they wanted to introduce Grievous's cough earlier because our character didn't have it, so we somehow had to maybe link the two together better. And so eventually we ended up doing a little sequence at the maybe 2 weeks before we had to deliver of Mace going out and crushing Grievous's chest, and that's what gives us the connection that all of a sudden he starts coughing.
The episode 2 makeup is quite different to the episode 3 makeup. It's a different color, his eyes are a different shape, he's got fangs. For several reasons, it seemed to go more towards the episode 2 design. He just looks a little friendlier and a little more upbeat, and it fit with the type of character that Dave had in mind.
Dave Filoni really wanted to put us in a scene together, and the Lair of Grievous was a great one for that.
George talked early on about having an anime influence. Well, rather than just have an influence, we're going to get a direct influence and go all the way to Japan.
We started working with Mr. Takeuchi early on in the development of the series, and he took on some key characters and ships and mechanical designs.
Immediately, I wanted Takeuchi-san to do all kinds of things. And one of them was designing General Grievous. It's a great shot.
So after Mr. Takeuchi had finished his storyboard, he actually got to sit with George Lucas, and we went through frame by frame what his vision was, and then combined that with George's ideas and notes.
Rather than line them all right up.
スタジオに行った時にもうなんか自分はどこに来たんだっていうか。
But I think we need a shot.
Not very many people get to sit with George Lucas and be taken through how to direct Star Wars, right from the master himself.
Now,
もう緊張でカチコチだったんですけどすごいエキサイティングっていうのかな。
They look in the door.
びっくりした経験でした。その場でこうシナリオとかの内容とコンテの内容をいじるんですけど、普通そういうのってなんとかパッとした思いつきでやるにしても辻褄とかそういうことが大体おかしくなるんですけど、それが見事にピシッとはまるっていうのは。
Then we cut to them sort of sneaking up.
ルーカさんのこの監督としてこう視野が狭くなってなくて俯瞰でこう物事を見てるっていうやり方にすごく感動しました。
Yeah, they can start. It was a really great collaborative session, and I think a really excellent episode came out of it.
We used the monster manual. There was a Gundark in there.
Oh, the Star Wars monster manual?
And then we had Killian Plunkett adapted.
Eventually sort of ran all these designs by George. He really liked the pre-existing one that was from the source book for the role-playing game, and actually told us to match to that as closely as we could.
One of the things George added was Jar Jar being very respectful at the funeral, you know, like he felt bad. And when we went to do the episodes with the Lerman, originally there was a comic book that Henry Gilroy had read, and something that I was familiar with, where these Amanin were actually fighting Imperials on a grass planet. So that episode of the comic book was really inspirational for what we were trying to do here. In the end, we needed a race on the planet that wasn't so violent as the Amanin had proved to be, especially in the comics, that weren't going to be such a threat. And we talked with George, and George decided that he would use the Lerman people that he had abandoned in Revenge of the Sith. But certain things are left over from the Amanin species, like the fact that the little Lermans roll, like the Amanin rolled in the comic books. And so that was something that was really kind of interesting to see how the expanded universe influenced the story that we were doing. It was also fun for us in this episode to bring the very popular expanded universe character of Ayla Sakura to the screen for really the second time, because she had appeared played by Amy Allen in the live action movies, and paying a real nod to the people that came before. But I think it definitely is exciting for the fans that know this stuff, that have seen it just scribbled on a page, to see it there, you know, live and thriving in the Star Wars galaxy. It's funny when, you know, people come up and say, well, but what are they burning in the fire? I'm like, wow, you really worried about that? That's amazing. I don't know what they're burning. Perhaps there's an area under the ice where there is some type of foliage that you could burn.
I mean, it's an ice planet. It isn't even like Hoth, where Hoth has rocks and snow. This is really meant to be just ice. And it begs the question, what do the Narglach eat? do the Tals eat each other? That was the whole thing, because in the script, the totem poles outside the Tals village are made of wood. And I just, asked Dave, they used all the wood on the whole planet for totem poles? I mean, what's burning in the fireplace in their igloo? Because if there's nothing but ice...
Perhaps they're burning, blubber rubbed on bones, and perhaps the bones of some of the animals on that planet that we didn't see are actually quite, volatile. They will burn.
What? This is where, it kind of pays not to get too logical, because it just hurts.
As we started into the development of the second part of the first season stories, George was really getting involved in the writing process. And this one story, he thought, would it be great to do a story about a clone that goes bad?
Execute Order 66.
Yes, my lord.
Who executes that order? Do they all execute that order? What happens if a clone chooses not to execute that order? Well, I think the Revenge of the Sith style clones are different than the clones at the beginning of the war, mainly because of the influence of the Jedi over them. And as that influence changes, the demeanor of the clones themselves changes as well. In the comic books, they had experimented with developing a virus killing Gungans. There had been a Karen Traviss novel, Republic Commandos, where the Separatists were developing a biological weapon. So using those stories that existed in the Star Wars expanded universe as a way of saying there are cases where this has already happened, and this is the Clone Wars version of that type of warfare, which is new to the larger Star Wars audience. George actually had a very specific visual in mind for the Angels when we were designing it, and he had to look at it very directly that time to approve the design. One of the things when I was doing that I added was the scenes where you see Ahsoka looking at the holographic table. The plan she uses where she rotates the Jedi cruiser on its side and the Y-wings fly out from underneath is actually a strategy that I read about in Timothy Zahn's novel, Heir to the Empire. And Grand Admiral Thrawn uses a very similar technique of turning his Star Destroyer on its side to lure the enemy in, thinking that the Star Destroyer is vulnerable. Then he launches all his TIE fighters out from underneath it around, and you basically, it's like a pincher's movement. You capture your enemy by drawing them in. Of interesting note, I don't know how many fans know this.
Dave had always sort of intended to see these things move very, very quickly. He likened them to velociraptors. He wanted to see them really sort of go.
Henry and I we couldn't get that version of the story to work. The Twi'leks have a French accent, because that's what George asked for, very specifically. My first instinct wasn't to have that, but I think it does give them, it gives them a certain flavor and a certain characteristic, and so we kept that with Aayla Secura, and we kept it with Thorn Futan.
Cad Bane was very different in that the direction came from George and was extremely specific. He said it was Lee Van Cleef from Good, Bad and the Ugly, but it was a Juro, who are the blue-skinned, vaguely Nemoidian-looking guys from episode 4.
Aura Singh makes her first appearance since Phantom Menace in this episode. She has a foreground element. But never before has, I think, a foreground element in film spawned so many spin-off comic books and novels and action figures. I mean, it's unbelievable. She has a whole history. Here she only has one line, but that's an improvement from no lines.
One of the things that Dave has been sort of adamant about is that the Jedi are not superheroes. They don't have these, limitless powers. There's certain things they can do and certain things they can't.
The second group of episodes in the animated series leads right up to the events that happen in the film. So we get a little background on what was going on right before episode 3. I grew up in animation. When I was in film school, my first films were animated. I took animation classes. I started out there. And so I've always loved animation. I could take this animated series that we developed with Gindi, and I could turn this into a real live series and also explore my interest in animation, because we started out developing computer graphics animation way back when, and then eventually in the computer division, which developed Pixar and went off to do Pixar. And so we had a lot of the tools, knowledge, and ability to do that. I just never had the place to put it. And this gave me the place to explore my imagination, and at the same time push forward the technology of animation to
do some things in television that had never been done before. We did it so well that I said, we could make this into a feature film. We could do a feature film using this technology, and it would look good. And so that's what we did.